Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Cell phone time is 9:15, which means it's time to start.
Okay.
That's official, right?
Yes, official.
That's official.
4 of us are ready.
And 4 of us are ready, so we'll go with that. 4.5. Come on down, Davis. Good to see you all. By way of, not introduction, I don't know what this is, kind of like where we're going. Today is our last session on English Bible version stuff, and next week we will start into the book of Joshua. So I'm looking forward to that. There's some really fun stuff in there. If you're familiar with the book, there's a big chunk in the middle of Joshua that's just, well, it's description of what allotments the cities, the tribes get, and it's a list of cities. And from a geographical standpoint, it's fascinating, but for most of us, extremely boring. So I won't bore you with that, but there's a lot of other fun stuff. I will go through it, but we won't spend a lot of time on it. The taking of Jericho, the loss at Ai, the renewal of the covenant up at Shechem. There's just a bunch of fun stuff in that book. So, okay. So today I want to talk a little bit about what English versions, what English Bibles are out there, and how to pick a good one. I realize most of you already have a Bible, and it's probably one that you like. I'm not trying to get you to go out and buy something new. And I also realize that my view on what constitutes a good Bible is almost certainly going to be different than many of the rest of you. So you don't have to agree with my conclusion on this stuff, but hopefully it'll be some information that's helpful anyway, some things to think about next time you go to buy a Bible for yourself. So, fifth lesson here. Let's start off with this question: why are there so many English versions? It's the type of people we are. Yeah. In some ways, it's a real blessing, and in other ways, it can be really confusing. I'm sure you've all had that experience where somebody reads in a Bible study or a message or Sunday school or whatever, and you're reading along, and what? Why is their version so different than mine? One of the reasons that I think we have so many English versions is that English continues to change. If you haven't been convinced of that already, go back and try to read some stuff from even just a century ago. And there has been a lot of change in English, even just in the last generation. Off the cuff, one of the things that we do now is we turn nouns into verbs. So I'm going to Google that. Well, Google's not a verb. Well, technically, it didn't start out that way, but we've changed. We do that with all kinds of words. It'll be interesting to see if that makes its way eventually into English Bible translations. It hasn't yet that I know of, but it's one of the ways in which the language changes, and that's in no way unique to English. That's true of every language. There are some that are a little more stable than others, but in Greek, the old classical Greek, Homer's Iliad, other classical Greek literature, it's a different language. It's the same language. It's a different grammar. It's a different style than the Greek in which the New Testament was written, which we refer to as Koine or Common Greek. There are shifts over time in the way things are spelled, the way grammar is done, all those kinds of things. True of English as well. Our understanding of the Hebrew and Greek texts continues to be refined. Some of that is based on the fact that we continue to uncover new manuscripts. Some of it's just the way that we develop in our understanding of how Greek and Hebrew work. I could say more about that, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. There's people studying and refining that stuff all the time and improving our understanding of it. Publishing is a business. Probably Zondervan is the biggest publisher in the Christian world, but there's a bunch of others, and they make a profit by selling books. And they're always, I know some folks that are authors, these publishing houses always have their feelers out trying to get people to write on topics that they think will sell, and Bibles are a sales item for them. It's a revenue source, and so there's some motivation there to produce new Bibles. Finally, there are some people that have an axe to grind. Some of the odd, I'll refer to it that way, translations of the English Bible that are out there now are because of that. Somebody wants to push a feminist agenda, for example, where they come up with some big idea that they think is different than what anybody else has done, and they want to get that out there, rightly or wrongly. So that motivates a little bit of it too. The kinds of categories of English Bibles that are out there. Translation is not an absolutely scientific enterprise. There's art involved as well. Versions usually fall somewhere along this spectrum of formal to functional. You may have heard this at some other time referred to as literal versus like paraphrase or something like that. I think this is a little less biased because literal is never actually literal, even though we use that word. And paraphrase has kind of a bad connotation to it. Formal is a word that describes how closely the English, even things like word order and grammar, reflect the Hebrew or Greek word order and grammar. A more formal translation is more tightly tied to the form of the English is to the Greek or the Hebrew. Whereas functional, what a functional version is attempting to do is understand what a Greek or Hebrew sentence meant to the original audience and convey the force of that to an English audience. And it's less tied to the actual specific wording or metaphors, word pictures, that kind of thing. And so you can see on here, New American Standard, the NASB, the King James, the ESV, those are more on the formal side of things. On the functional side, the Good News Bible, the New Living Translation. Somewhere in the middle, the CSB, that's the Christian Standard Bible put out by Holman. Yeah, okay. The NIV, of course, the 1984 edition was a little more formal, probably than the 2011 edition, and there have been some in between as well. So, you have that on your handout. So, actual English versions, and I'm not talking about editions or printings with commentaries and that kind of thing. On the formal and perhaps even mediating side, the NAS, the ESV, the English Standard Version, I've worked with this stuff so much. I recognize all these abbreviations, and I probably should stop and explain a couple of those to you. Christian Standard Bible, the NIV. Functional translations, the Good News Bible, the New Living Translation, the Living Bible, the Common English Bible, and the Message, TM. There are some one-man versions out there, and I would not recommend any of these other than just for fun. The Cotton Patch version came out in the 60s. Phillips was an edition done by one guy, the Pure Word, which I hate to even call a version. Not quite sure what to call that thing. It's really bad. And there are some politically motivated versions of the New World Translation, put out by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Has some real theological odd twist to it to reflect their view of things. The Oxford International Version is pretty heavy on the gender neutral. I don't know that it's actually neutral, but the gender neutral stuff. The Divine Feminine Version. I don't know if I'll spend any time with you on that. I do have some slides at the end, just because it's kind of unbelievable. I don't know if I'll have time to get to that. So we have some actual versions, and then we have, in addition to that, study Bibles. Study Bibles, if you're not familiar, are essentially somebody else adding their notes to the margin or the footnote or something like that, adding their own commentary to a Bible. This is tiny print, and I was just going to read some of it to you. And this is a smattering of what's out there. The ESV MacArthur Study Bible, the Holman Christian Standard Apologetic Study Bible, the NIV Adventure Bible, the CSB Tony Evans Study Bible. There's an ESV Study Bible, again, a Holman Bible for Teens, NIV Journal of the Word Bible, the New King James Spirit-Filled Life Bible by Jack Hayford, the NIV Women's Study Bible, the NEV Spiritual Warfare Bible. That's the first column, and I'm getting tired of reading. So let me show you some screenshots of a couple of these, just in case you're not familiar. I'm not intending for you to read the text of this, but I think there's enough visual. Yeah, thank you. I think there's enough visual there that you can tell on this particular random page that about half the page is commentary. You see that, the bottom half of the page. This is I think it's an ESV, MacArthur Study Bible. Yeah, it is. So that's what you get if you buy one of these. I got some others. The Dancing in the Desert Bible. So we have what would you call that? A call out up at the top. In fact, it's about 2/3 of the page. Jesus angered. The original African Heritage Study Bible is an interesting one. Its effort is to emphasize every place where there might be an African connection to the text. And they're pretty liberal in the use of the word African. Egypt even qualifies as African. In fact, probably most of Canaan in their view.
So there's probably like 3 pages on the Ethiopian eunuch.
Probably so. One of the funny, I first ran across this probably 20 years ago in a library out in Michigan, and it cracked me up a little bit because there are, you know how a lot of Bibles will have either illustrations or photos, color photos packed in at certain places. And in this one, every recreation of a biblical event with, actors standing there doing, Noah with his 3 sons or whatever, every single person was black. And I get the thing. For a long time in the English world, every single person has looked like they're white. Neither one is correct. I'm not sure how you correct one by going overboard in the other direction, but it caught my eye anyway. Spiritual Warfare Bible, again, a nice little call out explaining spiritual war aspects of a particular text. The NIV Bible for Teen Girls. I don't think we actually had any Bible text on that page. If you haven't grown up in a Christian home, you might not know where to start with sharing the gospel. Okay, yeah, so we would have to flip the page to get the Bible text. Everyday Life Bible, about 2/3 note on that page. I just pulled all these off CBD, by the way. If you want to go buy a Bible, they have pages, sample pages you can look at, and I just grabbed some of those to show you guys. the Jeremiah Study Bible. So if you're really into the teaching of David Jeremiah, you can get a Bible with all of his commentary and notes in it. Bonus. Maybe you picked up on a little negative on some of this. One I do favor more is something like this, the ESV Archaeology Study Bible, and not just because I enjoy archaeology, which I do.
It's got good maps, huh?
Maps, I think, are really helpful. And to me, this is less, here's how you should interpret, and more, this is background data. It's not opinion. To me, it's more helpful because it's like, okay, I can see where these two cities are at in relation to each other. That's quite a distance to travel. Whereas when I'm just reading the text, it's like, he went from here to here. Okay, was that like a mile or was that like 300 miles? So if I was gonna use a study Bible, it would probably be more oriented to backgrounds kind of stuff like this.
And since they picked the English Standard Version to attach the archaeology notes to, they like that version better than another?
Why did they use the ESV here? No, I don't necessarily think it's because they like that version better. I think probably where this started out was somebody had a great idea. Hey, let's do a study Bible as an archaeology study Bible with backgrounds and stuff. And they pitched it to Zondervan or whoever runs the ESV, and they said, sure, let's go with that. Let's try and collect authors to contribute, get a general editor. And so it's not, I don't think it's that they said, hey, which version do we like the best? Let's make an archaeology study Bible using that. But it's more, the publishing house said, we'll put in the money to start this project going, and of course you'll use the version that we publish, one of our popular versions. I think that's more likely how it went. So, good question. This is nothing new. I've shown you something kind of like this before. This is during roughly the time of the Crusades, a Greek printed, handwritten New Testament. And the bulk of this is the text, but then off on the side we have somebody's notes or sermon or that kind of thing. There's a long history of study Bible, if you will, in the New Testament and the Old Testament. This is a Geneva Bible, 1560. You could call it a study Bible. It's got a lot of notes, and we looked at this earlier as well. So how are study Bibles helpful to us? They can provide quick information that's helpful. You just glance down. You don't have to go pull another book off of your shelf or pull out your phone and try to look something up. They often give introductions and things like dates and outlines, maps that are useful. And I am particularly fond of cross-references. You'll most often see, like in the New Testament, when there's a quote out of the Old Testament. I didn't realize how much I enjoyed that until recently. I picked up a Bible that doesn't have any cross-references in it. I like it because it's large print, and I wanted to do some marking in it and stuff, but it has no cross-references. And so when I run across in the New Testament, they'll put it in small caps so I can tell it's a quote out of the Old Testament. I have no clue where it's from, and I don't know. I can't look it up because there's no cross-references in the Bible. So that's something I particularly enjoy. I didn't even know that they made Bibles anymore without cross-references, but I bought one. So it is. Are there drawbacks to using a study Bible? I think there are. I think they can provide an answer too quickly and prevent you, the reader, from thinking about what the text is saying. Anytime there's a difficult passage, If you've got somebody's answer right there, you don't even stop to think about what does this mean. You just immediately go to, well, what did Ryrie say? What did MacArthur, what did Jack Hayford say? Whoever, and you don't stop to process it yourself. And you're getting somebody's opinion. Maybe right, maybe wrong, but I think it stops the reader from mulling over the text and trying to discern what's this mean? This is difficult. What's up here? I think that's a drawback myself. I think it's obvious they can provide a skewed answer that fits a particular theological system, and that might be correct and it might not. And of course, once we find somebody whose system we like, it gives us what we're looking for. If I'm a follower of John MacArthur, then a MacArthur Study Bible will tell me, what's John think about this? By the way, I like John MacArthur well enough, but there's nobody, no theologian that's perfect, that has all the right answers. That should be odd. Well, I suppose theoretically there could be one, but how we figure out who that one is beyond me, and I think it's unlikely that there is one. We're all sinners. Clearly some of these, every single one of them is gonna skew one way or another. Okay. And finally, because they're printed on the same page as God's Word, I think they can too easily be taken as authoritative. You read somebody's note, they tell you what they think it means, and oh, there's the answer. Well, maybe not. Once you've been fed that answer, it's hard then to question it and continue the process of investigation once somebody's told you, oh, well, this is what it means. So that's another one of the reasons I think there are some drawbacks to this. I was thinking just this morning, I think we would all have objected if Moses, on his way down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, had paused on the path and gotten out his little scribble thing and written some notes to explain what it meant, right? And it's just an odd picture. I know then he ended up busting him, but is that really different than what we're doing with study Bibles?
He'd have to put a disclaimer.
A disclaimer. Yeah, the words of God in red, mine in black. There's another one we're coming to, but okay. Is there a perfect translation? And the short answer to that is no.
Well, you just let me down.
Really? I'm sorry. There are people that would answer that differently. King James only people are the only ones I'm aware of that I've run into that are version specific. But I mean, theoretically, you could do the same thing with some other version. Every language has ambiguity, and no two languages have exact equivalence. That's just the nature of language as God created it. And so there are multiple ways to say X in the source language in Y, the one that it is being translated into. But on the other hand, the message of God in any good translation comes through loud and clear. You can get saved by reading, I think, just about any English version out there today. So if there's uncertainty, it tends to be around the fringes on stuff.
Why do you say English version as opposed to?
Well, it's true. Yeah, it's true of any version. I say English just because that's what we're studying. Yeah.
I think of Wycliffe and the translations to other tribes and nations around the world. They've got their work cut out for them.
Yeah, they do. That's a lot of work.
Now, most of them, do they only have the one translation in their own mother tongue, or are they getting multiple ones like we have English? No.
Yeah. They're developing more and more. Gary, in Ecuador, you guys had 2, 3 language versions?
Usually Wycliffe will do one, and then a number of years later, if missionaries remain in that tribe and tongue, and there's growth in the movement, they may come back and update it with a better understanding. The issue is you have to start somewhere, and so you start with the understanding you have of the language, and then your language ability grows. In Quechua, we had the original missionary who was there for 52 years or something. She did a New Testament, just took the English and got as close as she could get to in Quechua, with the Quechua she knew. Then Wycliffe came in and did a New Testament translation that was substantially better. Then they came in and did an amplification of the Old and New, which was never accepted well because it just, the Quechuas kind of went, let's go back to that New Testament we had because we don't get that. And so they came back and did yet another revision. But that's a large people group, you know, with many, many missionaries there who were able to come in and give input, find men and women who knew the old language well enough and were steeped enough in non-Catholic traditions that we could have them help us translation. So it really depends, but often they'll do an original and then come back and polish that up later. Sometimes they don't even print the original one out. So it's more for teaching from and using there, and then as they grow, they come back.
And that's kind of a fun example because that's where English was 500-600 years ago. We are really in a unique place as English speakers because I'm not aware of any other language in the world that has as much effort put into translation of God's Word as English does. You look at Latin, you look at Spanish, German, French, they all have translations of the Bible, but they don't have near the variety that we do. And I think that's a real benefit for us.
Is most of it done in the United States?
Yeah.
Where the money is?
Yeah.
You think of those small groups, they don't have money to print this kind of thing. We do.
Yeah.
We have that extra blessing.
Yeah, we're going out and assisting with that kind of thing.
In fact, we're often the ones that pay for the print theirs.
Right.
Yeah. Just a couple examples here of the kinds of problems you could run into. Romans 16:1, is Phoebe a servant or a deacon of the church? Deacon is a transliteration of the Greek word diakonos. And diakonos, if it's translated rather than transliterated, means servant. So are they intending to say that Phoebe was one who served the church? Or are they intending to say Phoebe held the office of deacon in the church? Well, the Greek's not going to help you there because it's the same word. But the translator has to make a decision. Which English word am I going to use? Servant or deacon? Romans 16:7, Andronicus and Junia, are they males or a male and a female? It's hard to tell. Names are particularly difficult to parse for gender, some of them in Greek. And secondarily, are they outstanding among the apostles? Which would imply that they themselves are apostles. Are they well known to the apostles, or are they noteworthy in the eyes of the apostles? Those are three different ways English translators have taken that. And as you can tell, there's some difference there. They struggle with that, and I think it's a benefit to us to have multiple versions that we can look at with difficulties like this and say, okay, some scholars have read through this, they know Greek really well, and they've struggled with this. So I probably shouldn't just take my NIV 1984 and say, oh, they're outstanding among the apostles, so obviously it's a man and a woman, and they were both apostles. So there are female apostles. Well, there's a couple of steps in there that are quite uncertain. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't look at multiple versions. Romans 1:17, is the righteousness of Is it the righteousness of God or the righteousness from God? One would be an attribute of that righteousness, one would be a source. In Greek, they would look identical. It's a genitive form of the word. But again, an English translator has to pick one. You can't say of/from. You have to pick one. So, again, having multiple versions can help you out with stuff like that.
When John was writing, was he writing in Greek?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I want to read for you a quote here from Rod Decker. I think it summarizes some of this. Not all issues can or should be resolved by translation, and especially by one translation. Many of the questions raised are those of the biblical languages and can best be discussed in that context. Readers without such ability dare not lean exclusively on any one translation. Even if a church has adopted a standard translation, and that's wise for consistency in ministry, readers must be taught that carefully studying difficult issues requires using multiple translations. They need to know that all translations have some quote-unquote warts. Perfection should not be expected, though this should not raise questions regarding reliability and accuracy overall. And I think he's exactly right there. If you're into seriously understanding the Word of God, and you run across a difficult passage, have a question about what you're reading, I think consulting another version is an excellent way to go. And 3 or 4 or 5 wouldn't be bad. It's easy to do with electronic software now. Like you can even look up, there's a bunch of online places you can find that kind of thing. Just Google it. Yep. Google your verse. How am I doing here? I think I'm gonna. Hopefully, I'm not wasting my time here. Yeah, I might be. I'm gonna skip over a little of this. I had an example for you, just comparing different English versions. Instead, I'll throw this up. This is the 15 most popular English Bible translations by reading level. Did you know they graded English versions on reading level? On the far left there, we have the NIRV, which is the New International Reader's Version. And that's intentionally written at a 3rd grade reading level. And one of the things they'll do, for example, is break up a sentence. What would normally be a sentence in another version, they'll break it up into 2 or 3 or 4 smaller sentences. And of course, they reduce the length of the words. No 15-letter monsters. Keep it simple. I would never pick that as my primary translation, but it can be interesting. You get a little insight into what they're thinking as translators when you read a version like that. The Message there is the next one for a 4th to 5th grade reading level. God's Word, 5th grade. The New Living Translation, 6th grade. I'll skip over to the NIV at a 7th to 8th, ESV at a 10th grade reading level, NAS at 11th grade, and RSV and King James at a 12th grade. Although I have to say, too, I've graduated 12th grade, and there's stuff in some of the old King James I still don't understand.
It was my understanding that the Message is not strictly considered a translation since it's a commentary. I mean, it's someone's thoughts, and it's, my understanding was that it wasn't a true translation.
Yeah, you could make that case that the Message is not strictly a translation. Yeah. there's some politics in there. But my main point here was just that it's at that kind of reading level. I don't know, could you say the same thing with the International Reader's Version? I mean, they've attempted to break it up into smaller pieces to make it easier to understand. And it's true, a typical third grader can take that and read it, and they understand what they're reading. It doesn't follow the form of the Greek or the Hebrew very closely. It takes a different form than that. But okay, a couple of things I would recommend looking for in a personal Bible: translation that balances form and function. And I realize the NAS is on the extreme end of the form. ESV, the Christian Standard Bible, the NIV is about as far toward the functional side as I would be comfortable going for a personal Bible. But those are I think some fairly decent possibilities. What I use myself is a New American Standard. I know that's what Gary preaches from, and I think it's a decent version. I'd look for a format that's clean and readable, and something that has a cross-referenced text. And I value maps, and I think a concordance can be helpful if you want to look something up. It's not giving you commentary, it's just telling you where a word occurs. So those are some things that I would look for. Some things that I would avoid, and this gets a little more touchy, but versions that are sectarian or have an axe to grind, the TNIV, what's TNIV stand for? It's an NIV. It came out in like 04 or something. It was quite
Timid?
timid. It was not timid. It attempted to be inclusive or gender neutral, that kind of thing. Not nearly so bad as the Oxford International and some others, but personally, I would avoid a study Bible as my primary Bible. I realize a lot of you have study Bibles, and I'm not telling you to throw them away. But I would say when you go to pick your next primary personal study Bible, I'd encourage you to consider one that doesn't have somebody's commentary in it. I think that would be a good idea.
Do they make a Bible with little places where you can put your commentary in?
Yeah, you can get like a wide margin.
They have a note taker's
Yeah.
Bible. A lot of versions will have that option.
Where it's just blank.
I kind of like that.
It's an interesting one to pass down, I would think.
Yeah. And finally, I'm not fond of red letter editions. My primary reason, if you're not familiar with them, the words of Christ are printed in red. My primary reason there is that I consider the entire thing to be God's words, whether it's quote unquote from Jesus or whether it's something Paul says or whatever. And to me, it's just a distraction. I don't think the words of Christ are any more important than the words of the Holy Spirit, the words of God the Father, the words of Paul in our text. I don't think they're deserving, as it were, of being highlighted, printed in red, because I think it's all from God. So then for me, it's just a distraction to have it that way. And I realize in a group this size, there's going to be people that are staring at a red letter edition. I'm not getting on your case or saying you've done something wrong. Personally, I would say next time you go to look for one, give that some consideration too.
What do you think of the Thompson Chain Reference Bible?
I haven't spent enough time in the Thompson Chain Reference to give you an opinion. I'd be more than happy to look at it if you got one. And I've given you this at the bottom of your handout just as examples of Bibles that roughly fit the criteria that I've stated here. So there's a variety of versions there. Typically, Bibles come in either 1 or 2 column format. They can come in either a paragraph or a individual verse format. I kind of like the verse. Gary kind of likes the paragraph. But it's something to be aware of. Do they or don't they have maps? Do they or don't they have red letter? The binding. If you're gonna buy a good, high quality, long-term Bible, it's going to be expensive, but they're a joy to use, to handle, to touch, and they last a long time if you buy a good quality one. Leather, goatskin, those kind of things. They should lay out easily, nice and light. You shouldn't have to like push them down and break the binding, that kind of thing. I've had enough of those too. Font size is something to check out. You can see these go all the way from 8.5 to 11 point. That can make a pretty big difference. And if you're paying attention, you can find that when you go to look on Amazon or Christian Book Distributor or wherever. They'll tell you what the font size is. And so pay attention to that, because if it gets too small, it gets difficult. And you can see some ISBNs there and some pricing.
If it gets too small, it turns into your wife's Bible.
It turns into your wife's Bible. She can read it, I can't. Isn't that amazing?
Kris, none of these have the Apocrypha either, right?
None of these have the Apocrypha, sorry.
No.
If you wanted the Apocrypha, you can get it today in the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, I know has it, in some versions. You weren't wanting it though either, were you? No? Okay.
Do they sell it by itself?
Yes, you can get the Apocrypha by itself. Yeah. Okay. Just for kicks, since I have a couple extra minutes. Sure. The Divine Feminine Version, I know most of you have never even heard of this kind of thing. Sean Atterbury was the chief editor on this thing. Just to give you an Divine Feminine Version. I mean, the title should say it all, right?
What's the title again, sir?
The Divine Feminine Version.
Okay.
Here's just an example, and I've highlighted some things out of the start of Matthew. The good news according to the tradition of Matthew. Okay, that probably tells me some things. This is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of Bathsheba and David, the son of Sarah and Abraham. She has added in there the wives of the 2 patriarchs that are named in the text, and continues to do that wherever she can locate the name of the wife in the Old Testament.
You probably just leave Joseph out of it.
Yeah. Well, now here's an interesting one. I can't go into much more here, but they change references to God typically to the feminine, and yet they leave Jesus as a male. Do you know why? No. Not because he was one. That's a great guess, though.
Clearly.
Because he got crucified. And we don't want to encourage any kind of domestic violence. So we're going to leave Jesus as a male. That was, I mean, they actually state that's the reason why they leave Jesus as a male. So, yeah. There's some crazy stuff out there. I'll let that go. I should read you a little bit out of the Cotton Patch version here to end things up. Coming out of the South in the 60s, out of John 1. Here's John's testimony when the good white folks of Atlanta sent a committee of preachers and deacons to ask him what he considered himself. Jesus, of course. And Atlanta is in Jerusalem. He admitted right off the bat, stood his ground, and publicly asserting, I'm not the leader. The leader is Messiah. So they asked him, well, what are you then? Are you an Elijah? No, I'm not, he replied. Are you the prophet? Nope. Look, we've got to make a report to those who appointed us, they said. What are you? What claims are you making for yourself? I am what Isaiah the prophet said, a voice crying in the wild, straighten out the Lord's road. Since they've been appointed by the denomination, they inquired, well, if you aren't the leader, nor Elijah, nor the prophet, then why are you initiating members? Baptizing. John told them, indeed I am initiating in water, but right in your midst is standing one whom you fellows don't recognize. He follows me, but I am not fit to shine his shoes. Tie his sandals. You know this passage. All this happened in Jonesboro, across the Chattahoochee, where John was immersing. Well, so it's an attempt by this guy to put it in a setting that people would understand down in the South. And it makes for some rather interesting.
It's a musical.
Yes, I know.
Who wrote it?
Who wrote it?
If you hadn't asked me that, I probably could have told you.
They didn't want to put their names on
I don't have it. They don't- oh, they actually did. He didn't. It's a one guy effort, and he didn't do the Old Testament, just the New Testament. But sorry, it might come to me. And of course, there's a few that are just kind of a treat to read. The Jamaican New Testament, and this is actually a Jamaican version, and you can kind of make it out. There's no point to this, just that it's kind of fun to read because you sound like you're Jamaican bobsled team or whatever. I want to kiss my lucky egg. So, but I'm not ridiculing it. It's just kind of fun. It's semi-English. There's a variety of places around the world where they speak a pidgin, which is like a melding of English or a trade language with a native tongue, and some of these are that way. Word on the street, I don't even know what you would call this. It's not a translation, it's a trailer. Yeah. Okay, I got to put this on a slide where you guys aren't going to be distracted, so I can pray. Let's just go back to yeah. Just a commentary. So, jumping into Joshua next week, and look forward to going through that book with you guys. So, let me close us in a word of prayer. Lord, we're so grateful to you that we live in a day and age where we have so many resources. Your word is so freely available to us. Pray that we would be faithful and responsible stewards by taking advantage of that, reading the gift that you have given to us, studying it, as Darren says, driving it deep down into our hearts so that we will obey you, and just pray that you be honored and that your kingdom would grow because of the English versions that we have access to. Help us to be faithful and obedient in that way. In your name I pray.